makes me reflect on the whole time issue, because I think what's really funny is that actually some of the work that I really love has been done within the tiniest amount of time in a terribly busy day. And then I'll get holidays, because obviously I have school holidays, or I'll have days off, and I'll do nothing. So I'll complain like the whole time, I have no time to do this, like my life's so busy, and then you give me some time and I don't do anything with it at all. And yet I'll make something like under ridiculous pressure. It's not always the case, but I do think it's interesting to look at that.
That's a cool mind shift, yeah.
Like, is it even, that's why I keep asking myself, is it even really true that, like, if I had more time, if I didn't have this job and suddenly, I don't know, I only have to work 1 day a week or something, would I actually create more art?
Hello, welcome to Creative Minds Up. I just had another great conversation, this time with my friend Stacey. But before I tell you more about this episode, you're probably wondering where I am. I am in this really, really nice, colorful and like old looking place, which is the living room of my friend Adam. And here we are going to see a few more episodes in this beautiful background. But yeah, in case of Stacey, we were talking about this idea of creative parenting. We were talking about her creative practice as a very busy person, because Stacey, she is a parent, she is a teacher, and to balance her personal life and her artistic life and professional life, I know that many of you very often meet similar challenges. So we were talking about some strategies of dealing with it and some mindsets, and we were also talking about this idea how art world can be more accessible. Stacey is also a self-taught artist, so I hope that you will find this episode very useful. Before we go to it, I encourage you to join our creative community, link in the description. There you can connect with other visual artists, musicians, writers, poets, entrepreneurs, all type of creatives or people who are interested in developing their creative thinking. From me, that's everything. Let's go to the podcast. Hello, welcome to Creative Minds Up. Today, my guest is Stacey. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Stacey. I'm a 46-year-old single mum. I work in a school 4 days a week. I predominantly teach history. I also work with the school in trying to, I don't know if this makes sense to people who are outside of education, but trying to close what we call the disadvantage gap. So I work with people on what strategies we can use to help disadvantaged children to have a better experience of school and have better outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And outside school, you are an artist.
Yes, outside of school, I still struggle with calling myself an artist, but yes, I make art. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a few things that we want to discuss today, but the one I want to start with is your busy life. Mm-hmm. So you've told me that you as an adult and as a teacher and as a mother, you sometimes feel that you're so busy that you don't have that much time to be creative. Mm-hmm. Can you please tell me more about it and how it is right now and how it used to be?
Okay. How it used to be in my life before
you felt like that it's already quite balanced. Do you feel like right now it is balanced?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess I'm not sure. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels like I have no time for creativity. Sometimes schools are extremely busy places, and obviously there's a lot of people who work in workplaces that are really very heavily scheduled, and there's a lot going on all of the time. So it sometimes feels a little bit like I'm on a sort of autopilot through the day, and then either when I get home, it can feel like, say I'm working on something, it feels like I can't be bothered. It feels like the day's been so busy, and I'll think, right, I'm just going to sit down for 10 minutes or whatever. And that can feel quite difficult, just to sit down and do something. So sometimes it doesn't happen at all. And also, I think it's not just in terms of the time element. It's about the sort of mindset that I'm in, I guess. So it feels like there's a kind of work me that is busy and dealing with lots of demands all at once, and getting through like really quite hectic days. And then there's a sort of another version of me almost, which is slower and noticing things more and paying attention to things. And it feels like there's a fight between those two people. I say it feels like because I'm kind of convinced that that's not really true, but the experience is that I don't have time for my art. I am too busy. I can't get myself into the headspace that I need to be in. What I'm really interested in is how I can actually maybe even use the time in the workplace under those pressures as material for art. Like I've had a feel, I've been sort of exploring this for a number of years really, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting somewhere with it and other times it just feels impossible, but I've kind of got a hunch that there's actually plenty of things to notice even in that workplace and in people's working lives that can be used as material for art.
I totally agree, and I think it's a really nice thinking out of the box. Like when the thing that most people think is blocking you from being creative, you actually see it as part.
Yes.
You kind of use it as part of your artistic practice. So that's really cool approach. So let's get into like specific strategies. You are a busy person, and many people who are going to listen to this podcast, or people who are considering themselves as artists, creatives, sometimes feel like they want to be more creative, they want to create more, but they don't have time or they don't have the mindset. What are the strategies that allow you to be more productive, let's say, or at least to have this peace of mind to create?
Well, I feel like I should say, first of all, that I am quite lucky in the sense that even time-wise, I do have one day a week that I don't go to work. And I'm very conscious when I have these conversations with people that that's not always the case for them. So even I do have that sort of slot of time. However, even if I'm not careful, my work can slip into that day off even. So I think, the kind of work that I do can very easily just expand. Well, everybody's work can just expand to fit the time that's there. So strategies, recently, I've just made some real boundaries about when I'm going to work and when I'm not. This is quite recent. And so I haven't been bringing any work home to do on my day off, and I haven't been bringing any work home to do on the weekend. And what's interesting is that I'm noticing that a lot of the kind of guilt about that is just coming from me. I'm kind of making up stories about people will think I'm lazy, or people will think so I'd say strategy-wise is to notice where perhaps you're kind of making those things up yourself. Because I do speak to a lot of mothers in particular, actually, who maybe have this feeling of guilt over taking a bit of time to do something that's important to them, that I actually believe is beneficial for the people they're working with and their children anyway. But I do think there's a kind of sense of I should be doing something else rather than sitting around thinking about something or making some art or music or whatever it might be.
There is a nice comparison. Some of my friends use it. Is that for example, when you're going to the plane and the flight attendants, they tell you, in case of any emergency, first help yourself, put the mask on your face, and then help all the other people around you. So I think this is a really nice example to be aware that sometimes it's quite similar. It's similar case in your life, that when you actually put some time to invest in yourself, to develop your skills, your self-awareness, your creativity, you can give so much to other people around you because of the time that you gave to yourself first.
I absolutely agree with that, and I also know that when you're feeling really stressed and you've got children and then somebody says that to you, it almost feels. I've felt angry at people for saying that before, because I'm like, I haven't got the time to do that, and yeah, I've definitely, but I 100% agree with it. And I also think that to come back to what we were talking about before about the two different versions of me, and the one that notices and the one that doesn't notice, I'm trying to expect, because this is the same thing with school, you know, I can't be there for the children actually unless I'm grounded in myself. And so the more kind of busy and chaotic I get, the worse I am at my job anyway. So it's the same thing, like even in the midst of 30 children all, you know, going crazy, you actually do need to sort of, it's taking time sounds weird, because it's just taking a moment to, you know, settle yourself and notice what's going on. So I'm kind of in a process of trying to do that more, like just in the tiniest little ways, like just be in the classroom with all of the chaos going on and be like, okay, what can I actually notice right now? And trying to get into a practice of doing that, because I have a feeling that perhaps if I am going to, like you said before, like using the, it was making me think what you said before. There's a book, I've never read it actually, but The Obstacle is the Way. I think it's like based on some kind of Greek philosopher or something. But you know, when you were saying that, using the problem, if you like, what you perceive as the problem. So I'm kind of, I have a feeling that maybe the way in is to just practice really tiny little moments of noticing things sort of when I'm there, which is putting the mask on and sort of, you know, giving yourself what you need in that moment. And that, I don't know, I just have a feeling that might, well, already I feel like what I'm doing is I'm coming home and I'm really feeling very stressed, and I'm doing some writing like in the middle of that stress, like, okay, what can I actually, and I actually find sometimes that what I'm doing is feels more true, because this is where my life is, and this is what's going on for me, and that does need to be the thing that comes out either in the piece of art or in the writing. And in a way, the times when I'm away from that, like, they're lovely, but that's not really my life. That's not really what I'm about. So it's kind of like going into it is the way to get something really valuable in terms of art output, you know.
So what is it actually that you create? You've mentioned that you're doing some writing, but I also know you as a person who's making some assemblages. What is your art practice about?
Well, in terms of what I actually make, I've tended, I haven't made a massive amount of art, I have to say, first of all, but it seems to have developed. When I first got back to making art after a long time of not making anything, I did a lot of drawing. So I did drawing for years. So I still do drawing, but mostly it's I really love composition. I love just kind of getting objects together and moving them around until there's some kind of rightness to it, and I don't know where that rightness comes from, but it's just like, oh, there it is, you know, that feeling of I don't know why.
When something just clicks.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, that's where that's supposed to go. So I make compositions, but I tend out of anything really, I'm quite interested in just making stuff out of whatever there is. So bits of paper that I line around the house, or things I pick up off the street, or I love it if I find like something at school and I take that home and put that into a piece of art. That feels really sort of comforting to me after a difficult day. And I tend to, I don't know why this is, but I tend to make like multiple compositions, smaller compositions, and then I like to put them all together in a big thing.
I can give you a nice example of my lecturer from my university. I recently met with him, and his artistic practice is quite interesting because he is collecting everyday objects, sometimes like scraps that you can find in a rubbish or just in some random places. And what he's doing, he's covering them with gesso, like not just 1 or 2 layers. He's like doing like at least 12 layers of gesso, and then those little objects, which can be like, for example, little boxes or pieces of tape or like any like pieces of wood, whatever. He has like hundreds, literally hundreds of them covered with gesso, and he is giving those objects to other creative people or friends, other artists, and he's asking them to like do something with it, like nothing specific. Like he's not telling them that, oh, use it as a canvas or just decorate it. No, people are invited to just interact with it in the way that they want to, and then they give it back to him, and he's creating like exhibitions showing this kind of life of the material.
Nice, yeah.
So I think this is something
it's nice.
Cool.
So I 2 things about that. Like I really like things where you can see they've been through multiple processes. So I like something that's been ripped off something else and put somewhere else, or so I love layering and sort of peeling things off other things and seeing like, you know, what like a sort of accidental, you know, like textures and but also I really like and would like to move towards more collaborative types of work, because that's not something I have very much experience of, but so I love that. I love that. I love the lack of ownership in that. Like I would like, and I haven't really experienced that before. So yeah, I would enjoy sort of. It's good to have seeds planted about things, really, isn't it?
Do you have already any ideas how you can get there?
Not really, but I am. I mean, this year I am going to be part of it. I don't know at all how this will work. There's like 30 people, and there's opportunities to do a lot of collaboration. So I'm sure that will happen, but I don't have any idea of a structure or how I would like to go about that. I just know that I would like to see. I'd just like to have more input from other people. I think yeah.
In the previous episode that I was recording, it was with Sarah and Lisa. They were actually, I mean, I just want to show like different ways to find collaborations. One of them is that the 2 of them is they actually just talk with each other and like found each other practice really interesting, and they just thought, okay, let's start working together. So I think the easiest way is to just start collaborating with your friends, and this is also advice for our audience. But sometimes, like in your case, you just hear about the projects that are happening. Like the most important thing, I think, is to just proactively try to find what's going on in your local area and just get involved, see for those people who you can collaborate with, or potentially you can be the person who is actually inviting other people to work with you. So sometimes it's just a matter of like sharing that post on your social media, telling your friends, or just spreading the message. Okay, what I want to really focus on right now is your childhood and teenage years, when you told me that you felt extremely creative. Can you please tell me like what was that feeling? What were you doing when you were young and there was like so much freedom?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because it depends how far. So when we were having that chat, I was talking about my teenage years, but I guess like everyone can take it back to being a child's child, and how, like, I can remember just sort of I remember one particular memory, and that you never really know whether a memory is true or not, but I would like imagine things and literally see them in front of me. Like I remember looking at a window and it had all of these little sort of the wood had all these little marks on it, and I was looking at it, and to me they were like people running all over the place, like and I used to experience that kind of thing quite regularly. And then I feel like it's just that children haven't sort of pinned down reality yet. Like it's sort of fluid, and things that they think will just sort of appear somehow.
So
it's
like your imagination is merging with reality.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and somehow, I don't know. To me, growing up did almost seem like that disappearing somehow. I don't know. As I'm saying that, I don't really know if that's true or not, but that's the way I've perceived it. But as a teenager, I'm very fascinated with this actually, because I work in a school, and because I just come across this so often in women of my age. But that's because who I'm hanging. That's because that's who I see a lot. I'm sure there's lots of other people. But so when I was a teenager, like I was just making stuff all of the time. I was writing all of the time. I did everything. I had poetry, writing, creative writing, acting, singing, drawing, like everything. And then I really don't know what happened, but I seemed to just kind of leave school, and I just stopped doing anything. I didn't make anything at all for decades. Nothing.
Do you think maybe that the environment that you were in was kind of stimulating you to do this? Like, for example, you mentioned like acting, singing. Were there like any classes to do this?
So me and my best friend were like the drama geeks in the school. So and we had a really brilliant teacher. And then, yeah, so I think like, but I do remember doing like my art. I do remember being kind of disappointed by art classes, by art at school, and not experiencing my art lessons as particularly exciting or interested, and feeling a bit like there were a couple of people who were really technically very good drawers, and there was this feeling that I might have made this all up in my own head, but my experience was that that was what the art was about, and that other people's ways of doing things weren't sort of valued in the same sort of way.
So like you have to have good skills.
Yes.
If you don't.
And I was okay, but I was never like really technically, people weren't like, wow, my drawing's really great. But I do remember there were two art teachers, and one of them wasn't like that at all, and one of them really wanted you to sort of, he was interested in how you saw things. So I don't know where I got that idea from. I actually think maybe like the class kind of valued that. There was like, it felt like there was a hierarchy of who was good at art and who wasn't good at art. And yeah, I was never that good. So I don't know if that kind of played into it a little bit.
I know that right now the roles kind of changed, because now you are a person who is running your, how's it called, creative space.
Yeah.
And now you are this art teacher who is telling the kids what to do, or maybe you are just.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean that club it's literally just a free for all. We all just come in. It's not led. It's just a space where they come. I do want to do some more directed projects with them, but boring story. But I had something ready, and it's too boring to go into. I don't really orders haven't turned up and stuff like that. But
so how is it going so far?
It's good, but it basically consists of me putting a load of stuff in a room and putting some music on and wandering around the room and talking to them about what they're making. That's all we do. But it's for me, I think that in a heavily structured day where they're under instruction all of the time, it's actually a nice space it's just a relaxing space, and there's no rules, and they can just do whatever they like, and it's just nice. So I like that. But there's and some kids do come who are really quite serious about what they do, and they bring their own stuff and they'll work on a project for a while, and then other people just come because they want to colour in, and some of them make little bracelets with each other and stuff, and but I like it because it's quite varied, like the things that they're doing. It's quite funny because there's like a little group who are quite dark and they like to draw pictures of one of them was doing this thing where they had to do all these different gory pictures over the month, and then beside them there's like these girls making little friendship bracelets with hearts and things.
Unicorns, rainbows.
Nice.
And then you say, okay, let's collaborate.
Well, yeah, that's how I'd like to move a bit. It's like, how do I am interested in, can I get these kids to come together and do something together? That would be great. Again, the thing of time comes up again, like, have I got the time to, because at the moment it's quite easy to run because it's just a bit of music and some stuff, but there's a very busy day either side of that, and the thought of doing another structured sort of thing where I have to sort of try to get kids to do certain things. I don't know. So
maybe this simplicity is the solution, because as you said, you feel like you just put those materials over there and you just turn on the music and you just talk to them. That's it for you. It's like simple, but this is actually something going on, because like, let's imagine that there is a person who has similar intentions, but like things like, oh, those kids are going to have very high expectations, and I expect a lot from myself. I need to make it very professional. I need to prepare like the structure of the teaching. Every week there has to be like specific workshops, and then as a result you do nothing because you feel paralyzed. So I think this simplicity is a solution, that you actually give this opportunity to those kids.
Yeah, and what I am learning is that with this and with all things is like when you say you get that paralysis, don't you, when you have an idea and there's like and then all of the, and it should be like this and it should be like this and it should be like this, and then the weight of that kind of stops you from doing anything. But I am learning that you just do that one little thing and then you see what happens as a result of that. And because actually, even though I'm saying that, we have done little things in creative space, we've tried things out, we did have a collaborative, like I think you might have suggested this actually, we did like a mural on the wall where they all came up and sort of added things onto each other's pictures and things like that. And
yeah, I remember that.
They've had little themes and things, so it does kind of develop and grow, and sometimes it can feel like it's not, but there are little differences in how we're doing things. So I think I don't, without putting too much pressure on it, I think it will grow and change, and we will do something together soon, I think.
I hope so. Okay. You are also a person who actually taught themselves how to be an artist. I mean, okay, you don't consider yourself as artist yet, but for sure, I think you are a great artist. But can you please tell me about this process of just learning by yourself?
I do consider myself an artist, by the way. I struggle a little bit to say it. I feel a bit. I do get a bit embarrassed, really, to say that. Or if somebody says that about me, I feel a bit embarrassed. But I think I need to say that because I actually, like, we all are, really, aren't we? It's a funny word, isn't it? It's anyway. So
the more I study art, I think being an artist is just about being sensitive about the world around you.
Yes,
It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have great skills and create amazing like outputs of your imagination. I think it's about interacting with the world around you in a sensitive way.
Yeah, that's
expressing
a good word,
what you think and feel.
Yeah, that's useful because I do struggle with that word sometimes and what it actually means. But yeah, well, like I was saying earlier, I did begin again with teaching myself to draw, which involved a lot of watching a lot of online tutorials and a lot of just loads of people online, really. Reading a lot of books.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, so this is like, I mean, what I mean is, so I think I did all that stuff at school and then I did nothing. Yeah. And then, so probably about 7 years ago now, I sort of started to, first I started to write and then I started to draw. And I kind of like tied myself in knots a little bit and was quite frustrated at trying to draw how other people would draw. And I did that for a long time. And that was useful in a way, like it taught me a lot about form and line and gesture and composition and all of those different things. So it was actually useful. But it was almost like, I think now what I've started to tune into more is what you're talking about, like my sensitivity and how I'm engaging with the world. And that's really where it comes from, not trying to learn how to sort of do something that somebody else is.
I'm wondering how useful was it for you to be self-aware? Because I know that you are a very, very self-aware person. That's your questions that you ask yourself about your consciousness, like the world around you. I wonder how it influenced your process of learning. Like, can you give me any specific questions that you were asking yourself, or like any metrics that were measuring your progress?
Now, what I would say about that, when I was trying to teach myself how to draw, I think it was quite torturous because I was trying to measure my progress by these external sort of standards of what a picture is supposed to be. What I would find is I would draw something and I would like the initial energy of the drawing, and then I would try to refine it into what I thought a drawing should look like, and I would spoil it in the process and I would hate it. What I've learned recently is that that can just be the drawing on its own, just that sketch that is my drawing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't think I had the confidence to let that stand as like that's what I've got to say about that sort of thing. It had to be turned into, I need to make it look like this person's telling me that it has to have this kind of line, or it needs to have this kind of form to it, blah, blah, blah. Which is not to say that that's not useful to know, like those sort of rules and things, but to try to execute them in the way that you're kind of, that wasn't working for me anyway, if that makes sense. Now, something, I don't know if this is quite answering your question, but what I'm really learning now is that because I do think a lot about consciousness,
I know.
This is my thing, and the idea that there isn't a self. So what I'm really learning is that, so I would find it very difficult to make art, and I still do sometimes, because if I were to make something, whether it be a drawing or whether it be a composition, and I draw something and I don't think it's good, or I put something on a piece of paper and I think it's not a pleasing composition, then there would be like some feedback, which is like, you're not very good at this, so why are you bothering to do this, because this is rubbish. And so that would really stop me from wanting to make art, because it was unpleasant. I'm saying was, like, this is still the experience some of the time, quite a lot of the time, I guess. But what I'm learning is that like, it really doesn't mean that. It just means you don't like the way that line is, and so we do a different one, or and so I don't feel as it. Or say I do some writing and it's like I read the writing and it's kind of like, that isn't actually what I think about that, but that's okay, because then that's actually quite good, because then the next piece of writing that you can do can get closer to refining the thought that you have. And the same with the composition. Which is probably why I like things that have been through lots of processes, because it's just kind of like, you put that there, I don't really like that, let's move it. And there's something quite beautiful about something being sort of like moved about and changed in multiple different ways until it's right, if that makes sense.
I've noticed something similar in my practice, that I start drawing or painting, and then I think I especially see it when I do portraits. Like, I start a portrait and like maybe after a few minutes or an hour of the process, I feel like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst drawing I've ever done. And like it's like very often like, okay, is it this the one? Is this the one, the worst one? And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be the worst one. But after some time, like basically telling yourself, okay, let's put those negative thoughts away for a second. Let's like keep going. Then I realized, okay, actually, this might be the best one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as you are able to not only ignore those negative thoughts, but just tell yourself, okay, I accept that those negative thoughts are here, but like, please let me focus and just trying to not allow them to stop you, because the worst thing you can do is just stop and like never come back to it.
Yeah.
But when you're like keep being persistent and like keep trying, then you actually realize that just because of this effort that you're putting into this creative process, you actually get somewhere.
Yeah.
And the similar idea which you've mentioned, that sometimes you just like this process of keep trying different things. When you are actually keep experimenting with the same idea, you realize that those different versions all together, they are representing your imagination.
And the version, the thing that you didn't like is just as important as all of the bits that you did like. It's a really important part of the process, and I think it took me a really long time to realize that was the case. So it would put me off, and I think, to come back to the thing about, the time and the busy life thing, it would feel like having a really busy day where, I'm really tired and I just want to do something that I enjoy, to then sit down to be sort of tortured by this thing that I don't think is any good. Like, it was like, why am I even doing this? Like, what's the point in it? But I am sort of realising now that actually, like, the work's just the work, and it actually doesn't really matter what you think about it. It doesn't really matter how you feel when you're doing it. You don't have to enjoy it. It doesn't even have to be fun. Like, it's just, you're just doing it.
You're just
doing it. Yeah.
My whole day is like torturing me. So now, when I create art, I'm not going to allow it to torture me. I'm just creating anyway.
Yeah. Just doing it anyway. So there just seemed to be like something lighter, and that does come from when you were talking about the like the self-awareness or the exploration of like what experience really is, or what it means to be a human being, or what thought is, or definitely that exploration helps, because then when thought's looked at, like, what even is thought? I'm not controlling. What are these things that pop into your head that, why do they have any say on whether I'm going to make this piece of art or not make this piece of art? It's kind of like, doesn't really matter what thoughts are coming in. And there's certainly not any way of like, well, I don't know, like, if there's any way of directing or controlling them, I don't know, because it's interesting when you were saying to ignore negative thoughts, and I understand what you mean by that. But yeah, I almost feel like it doesn't matter as much now that there's a negative thought, and it doesn't necessarily mean like I shouldn't be doing this, or that seems to.
So when I create, I've noticed that I have like different ways of like this internal conversation. Sometimes it's just like kind of meditation, when I'm so dedicated to putting like all the lines and like observing what I see, or like just creating, that I'm kind of not thinking about anything at all, and it is like a meditation. Sometimes it is other way, where I'm considering so many possibilities that my mind is like so busy, like keep coming up with new ideas and trying to like choose which option I should choose, which direction I should go to. And sometimes it's just like pure joy, just enjoying the process and like having fun. Yeah.
So would you say, like, when you're in mind's really busy, lots of different choices, making choices. Is that happening separately to not thinking, it feels like a meditation, or are they like different modes of being, would you say?
I would say separately. Like usually I have those busiest time of thinking when I'm about to start and I'm like considering different possibilities. And this is actually part which I enjoy the most. It's just creating the work in my imagination where I can just very easily like rearrange everything and like change and like keep trying new things. And sometimes this is actually what is problematic for me. Once I already started, I already like moved to one direction for a very long time. And then my mind is telling me, hey, what if you come back? Or like, what if you go to this direction? What if you paint it red? And what if you paint it blue? What if you tear off your drawing? And then like all of those possibilities telling you what you can do, but you have like only one piece which you already kind of like.
What do you do then?
So sometimes I'm just keep moving forward to the direction that I already chose at the beginning. But most of the time when I actually decided to be consistent, I realize at the end that I just did like something that is not as creative as I wish. So my advice would be, even when you are scared and like not sure about this option that is somewhere there, but you like thinking about staying consistent, then just try it, because this is when you expand, this is when you learn something new.
I have exactly that. I think it's fascinating because it feels like this impossible sort of dance between the two, because I feel like sometimes you do. I remember doing an activity with you actually about this. I can't actually remember what it was, but I remember talking about it, like constraints, like having some sort of constraints, like some kind of boundary, like.
Wasn't that our workshops?
Yeah, I think it might have been something like we were drawing something and we were repeating the same thing over and over again. It was like variations of the same thing. I think it might have been butterfly. I don't know whether it was or not. And then it was kind of, I can't remember how it happened, but there was a conversation about to what extent, you know, should we just have limitless possibilities when we're making, and how that can be problematic actually, because it can almost kind of stifle you a little bit when it's like, oh, there's so many different things you could do, so many different ways. It's like infinite, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to move forward sometimes like that, because you have to narrow it down a little bit, don't you? But at the same time, I know what you mean about having don't like, this was the problem with drawing for me. There was always an image in my head of what this was supposed to look like, and whatever was in front of me was never going to be what I thought was.
But actually, this gap in between, this is what is fascinating. Some people are trying to like make this gap as small as possible, like perfectly recreate their ideas in their minds. But actually, this gap, the more you're kind of being surprised by the process, this is when something really interesting is happening.
I think so, yeah.
So the exercise I think that you were probably referring to is that sometimes in my workshops I do this thing where we have one object and I ask the person to draw it again and again, but like in different way every time. Or I mean, there are different ways of like making your mind to think in more divergent way. I like this exercise when there are like many circles, all of them look exactly the same, but at each one you just draw something else and you make it look in a different way. And it's especially visible when you, for example, want to draw a specific object. If it's simple, the more simple it is, the better. But you fold the paper into like, let's say, at least 4 equal columns. But when you draw each column, you don't see the other one, so you have to fold it in a certain way. And you just draw the thing in a certain style. Then you fold the paper and you look like at the second column without seeing the others. But you take, like, for example, different colors, different medium, and you like keep creating, and you do this like 4 times, or you can do this more times, and then at the end you see how the same thing can be shown in many different ways. Then you compare it, and you're surprised how many possibilities are there.
And I like that, because it's sort of it's like the opposite of being able to do whatever you want. It's almost you can do it in both directions, can't you? You can kind of narrow it down and say you do loads and loads of iterations of the same thing, and I think that can really allow you to go off on different angles, because you're not kind of overwhelmed by the amount of possibilities. It has a framework of kind of like
yeah. So you are also talking about this limiting limits and boundaries here. So there's also other exercise that I do when you are allowed to only use like one material. So I sometimes just like I give you like literally one piece of pastel, and I ask you use this pastel like as many different ways as possible. You make a line, you drop it, you are trying to rub it, you're very gentle or you're very strong, and then you see that with even one simple thing, there are so many ways that you can do. So basically, yeah, it's just this playfulness about limits and possibilities. Anyway, creative process. Your creative process. Let's focus more about it, but starting with the reasons why you create. What is your purpose? And like your why?
I do think it's quite a difficult question, and
that's good. I like difficult
questions. It is a hard question. I think it's in flux, I would say, but I think that now that I look back on starting to make art again, sort of more recently, I can see that really the reason, and I don't think this is a good reason, but I think the reason I wanted to create something was that I was having a really hard time. I was having a really awful time, and I wasn't very happy with my life as it stood, and I was kind of looking for something to, I don't know, redeem my life in some way, and I think that's why it was so hard for me, and why I didn't really like the things that I was making, because it couldn't really do that for me. It's not what art is for. It's it wasn't going to make me feel better about anything else in my life. Sorry, this is getting a bit deep. But
I mean, that's good. But like some people are actually using art for the therapy purposes.
Yeah, I don't mean like that. I mean almost like a validation, like, oh, if I can get good at this, then I'll feel better about myself, sort of thing. And I feel like it took me a long time to realise that wasn't really the purpose of making this, whatever it is I was going to make. And I think that's kind of why what I make has changed, and that I'm making things in a very different way. I would say there's a massive like therapeutic, if you want to put it that way. Like it's definitely less so now actually, but for quite a while it was like a processing of feelings, and I did some work around Jungian psychology and symbolism, and I did a lot of work was around that, like which things are symbols like for my past, and that was really quite useful to me in a sort of therapeutic sense, if you want to put it that way. Like it felt like it was, I don't know, moving things on somehow psychologically and emotionally. So that there was that. More recently, that's lessening, and it feels like it's almost sort of purposeless now in a way. It's more just engaging with what's going on, like what's happening in life. I really liked when you said about sensitivity, because it's just, for me, it's just an a physical output of experience. It's like, so I'm here living life, and here's a sort of like an honouring of your experience. Like, it's sort of like something, I think it's amazing that human beings do that. It's like they're having this inner experience, and then it's totally unique to that person, and then like there it is, like out in the world, and to be experienced by everybody else in a completely different sort of way that you have no control over. And I love that, like, and I think everyone should be doing it in some way, and I think people are, like, they do it, and I don't think you have to be drawing or making art, or it can be done in all kinds of ways. It can be done in jobs, and it can be done in interactions with people. It can be done in parenting. It can be done everywhere. It's just like that's why I struggle a little bit with art and artist, because it doesn't really matter what it is. I don't think it's just, I certainly experience sometimes like I'm not sensitive to what's going on. I've kind of shut down a bit, and I'm just kind of going through the motions a little bit, and it feels different. And so to me, it's getting to the point where it doesn't matter too much what it is that's coming out. It could be this conversation, or it could be a conversation with a kid at school, or a conversation with my friends, or it could be a piece of art, or it could be a piece of writing. But it's just that, like, real engagement with what's happening, as opposed to this kind of like, I don't know, getting stuff done on my to-do list and walking through my day as if I'm sort of blind, like, almost to
being less indifferent, I would say, about the world around you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you say that sometimes you just take the time to just notice the things around you. This is, I think, a really nice example of that sensitivity that is just going on in your head. But just because you notice those little tiny things which make you reflect on them, this is how it helps you to grow, like, inside.
I'm thinking about when you were talking about those thoughts. I wonder if that's part of that process for me as well, is, that a really long journey with my thoughts, and, whatever they might be, negative, or, and not being able to be very sensitive to what's going around me, because of the obsession with these things in my head that are about what people think of me, or this constant chatter of you're like this, or you're like that, or they think this, or they think that. And for me, that brings the shutters down a little bit, and I feel like I'm sort of in my head. I'm not sort of in the world so much. So I think maybe a process of like detaching a bit from those thoughts, or kind of just understanding. I was going to say understanding what those thoughts are, but I don't really understand what they are. But understanding what they're not, understanding that they're not reality. They're not something. I don't need to spend all of the time engaging with all of these like crazy things that are going on in my mind that are being made up, because that's a bit of a block for me, for expression, and engaging with things, and looking properly, or listening to people properly, or.
But I think this is a really cool thing, like, for all the people who are creating, instead of being focused purely on the idea that you are trying to recreate, focus on this process of recreating it. Like, as you are just asking yourself, what are thoughts? Like, what is my consciousness? Like, why I'm doing this? When you're asking yourself those questions, like, this is going to be like really mind-blowing, and it will make you to see this creative process, but even your own life in like a very different way.
I think so.
Next question, which is actually still connected with your reasons. Do you remember what were those reasons when you were younger, like at those teenage years? Or maybe you don't remember.
I think they were probably quite similar in the sense of I do there was always a kind of element of wanting to, and this is not what I think expression is about, but of, this sounds awful, but I want to do this because I want people to like it, or I want to do this because I want people to like me, or I want people to think I'm good at something. I remember that quite strongly when I was very small. I want to write a book because everyone will think I'm really clever, or you know, that kind of thing. But then at the same time, there was also just, you know, having I mean, the teenage brain's very interesting child. You know, they're both, you know, that transition phase of like, not a child anymore and not an adult, and it's a weird time, isn't it? Yeah. So I remember very strongly like feeling like I wanted to rebel against everything when I was a teenager. I just hated. It's hilarious that I'm a teacher now, really, because I was. In fact, I did GCSE art, and I remember it's another example of something I thought was going to be amazing. This is probably where it all went wrong for me. This idea that I was going to make this huge, big piece, and it was a paint, and it was all going to be about how they wanted us to conform to everything, and I hated uniforms and all this kind of stuff. And I remember the process of doing it. You had to do this exam, and it was like you had to come in for hours and hours, and I ended up it was going to be this huge big piece, and I just ended up cutting it smaller and smaller and smaller.
Like, do you mean like literally?
Literally, because I just couldn't actually execute what I thought I could, and there was a real disappointment in it of like, oh no. So I'm just thinking that's probably one of the reasons that made me stop. But yeah, the whole piece was about kind of feeling like school was, I don't know, trying to mold me into this person that I didn't want to be. So there was definitely a rebellion in the things I was doing as a teenager.
But right now, as a person who is running this creative space, do you see yourself as someone who is trying to control those kids? I think no, probably like not at all.
It's so interesting, and it's why I'm also very interested in how my work with young people in my art practice are actually like not separate really. And schools are such interesting places. Like if you want to look at boundaries and freedom, like there's no better place to explore that, because like, of course, you know, I want the children to express themselves and be themselves. And there's an absolute necessity for, in terms of safety and respect for each other, that within that community we have rules. And so I am an enforcer of rules. I am an authority. I do have to create these restrictions on what they're able to do and give consequences and all of those types of things.
What I'm thinking about is that sometimes when you are trying to put those rules and like be this, let's say, bad teacher, when you have those rebellious kids, they are rebellious because of that tension. So I'm not sure how to do this, but for me this is like a really interesting thing. Like not only talking about art, but if you look at the biographies of many like exceptional people from different fields, including science, music, creative, non-creative stuff, the very rapid and intense development of those individuals very often came from this tension when they were supposed to do something else, when they were required to follow the rules, when there were basically so many obstacles that they were obsessed about breaking those rules. They were like trying to escape. Basically, there were those difficult situations when you were forbidden to do something, but because of those tensions, those experiences of them breaking those rules were so intense and so influential for their lives that as a result, in the long term, they made them like keep breaking and breaking those rules again and again, and like developing really fast.
I don't know if this is the same thing, but what that makes me think about is so I've got a friend who talks about how does she put it? I think she uses the term creative constraints, a similar sort of thing, like that the most creative things come out of there's a problem. It's kind of like, this is a problem, and I know you do quite a few, like you do games around, you know, finding creative solutions to problems, and so I guess that comes back to what you were saying earlier on about the solution being in the sort of problem, and it makes me reflect on the whole time issue, because I think what's really funny is that actually some of the work that I really love has been done within the tiniest amount of time in a terribly busy day. And then I'll get holidays, because obviously I have school holidays, or I'll have days off, and I'll do nothing. So I'll complain like the whole time, I have no time to do this, like my life's so busy, and then you give me some time and I don't do anything with it at all. And yet I'll make something like under ridiculous pressure. It's not always the case, but I do think it's interesting to look at that.
Cool
it's
mind shift, yeah.
Like, is it even, that's why I keep asking myself, is it even really true that, like, if I had more time, if I didn't have this job and suddenly, I don't know, I only have to work one day a week or something, would I actually create more art? I don't even know if I would. So like maybe and again, I feel cautious about saying things like that, because, for example, my child is a teenager, you know, I don't have several young children to look after. I don't work 5 days a week. And there may be a limit to that, and I guess that I'm interested in that as well. You know, so that might be true for me in my situation, but because I'm very interested in having conversations with women and mothers in particular, because I feel like, probably just because I am a woman and I am a mother, that the creativity of that group of people sometimes is really sidelined. Like, as a mother, you have small children, you go out and there are any amount of creative activities for your children, and you go along and it's like, but I'm like, well, what are the mothers doing? Like, why, you know, why are there not so many? And there might be, I don't know, maybe I'm seeing things. I'm not a mother of a young child anymore, but I certainly experienced it as a kind of, I loved being a mother, but I did kind of, I do feel like maybe we don't value the creativity or kind of see that as an essential part of not just mothers, but people's lives. Like, I think we don't, to me, it's that process you were talking about before of like, that's having that space, like to be sensitive to your surroundings and notice things and have some sort of creative process and engagement going on with life, you know, whatever kind of output that has. I don't know if we really value that in workplaces or in education systems necessarily as much as we could. And I think it's short-sighted, because I actually think people are more productive and perform better and have better quality of thought and are able to be better decision makers and all of those things when they do have a creative outlet, or they have that space to kind of process things properly. It's just workplaces, I don't know, the culture sometimes, like, I just feel like there could be a shift. I feel like we could.
My reflection on it is that if we try to simplify it, it looks basic in a way that if you imagine like our kind of okay, for now let's call it a level of life. If you are like somewhere at the bottom, where you are basically trying to survive, and you are struggling with fulfilling your basic human needs, then it's really difficult to be creative, to have time to just to be sensitive, enjoy yourself, and like express yourself in a creative way. Over there, sometimes you don't have time for it at all, or you have no choice but find really creative ways to deal with such limited resources. So sometimes the environment can kind of demand from you to be very creative. If you have, let's say, this more privileged wealthy or stable level of life. This is when you have that freedom of time, freedom of materials, resources to actually express yourself. But because of that, you can also like get lazy because it's not required from you. You do this because of the desires, the aspirations that you have. So yeah, like in order like to deal with it, because again, even if you're like there, like let's call it on the lower level, when you are actually being creative, when you are actually able to find those creative solutions, this is how it can help you to change the level of your life. I'm still thinking that level is not the best word, but it's because of my English.
I understand what you mean, and I think so. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it?
Yeah, for example,
and so that sort of again, I don't know how to talk about it properly either. But there's a kind of anger in me, for want of a better word, about that situation that you described there, and I know we were going to talk a little bit about accessibility and arts and things like that, and certainly like equity in all areas of life is something that like drives me, I guess, both in the arts actually as well, and in education system and just in life, and I'm interested in what you said there, and again, like sort of really how like is that true, that we need resources, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm interested in looking at that, because it does feel like that sometimes. It does feel that, I mean, the art world can be incredibly elitist and is exclusionary the right word? You know, or anyway, that at least that's the way I perceive it sometimes. But I mean, what even is the art world? You know, it's I don't know.
I think that those resources, for example, the art materials themselves, or even like access to education on art, all of that can be very useful. Like I think almost all of the artists, when they start, all of us meet with those doubts about yourself, about those really common problems like I don't have time, I'm not sure if I'm good enough.
Yeah, I feel a lot of it's like I don't think I am worth listening to. Like I'm not a person who needs to be listened to. And I was reflecting on this recently when I listened. There was an artist talk, and this young female artist was talking about her process, and this whole room of people are sitting there listening to her. And I was just thinking, like, we all deserve this space we all deserve for our experiences to be really listened to and heard properly. And I think, unfortunately, we do have, it's like some sections of society seem to, you know, it's perfectly valid for, you know, for everyone to give space for their experience. And then there's many people who, you know, would think it's sort of laughable to share their experience of, you know, who would care, you know, what's going on in their minds, or and I mean, and I that bothers me, and I think it's not what my current practice is about, but it's what I guess if I think about moving into different art forms and collaborative art forms and maybe socially engaged practice and that kind of thing, that's what I'm very interested in, is like giving voice, I guess, like how do we give voice to, I think it's just so necessary. And like kids at school, you can see straight away who is being nurtured to open their mouth and say, how they find things, and they'll speak and great, wonderful, and you can see straight away the people who that's not the thing to do, and yeah, I think we should all be able to speak.
Coming back to this idea that I was talking about. So, for example, this thought that hey, you sometimes it's good to express what you think about. That this actually your opinion, your creative expression has value. Those ideas, those are the resources that can actually, as I said, those different types of artists to actually grow and find more confidence in their creative process. So I think if we first start with like sharing that knowledge and making it more accessible, that would make a big change. But also coming back to this idea of like lower level of being creative and like having more of that freedom, I sometimes see myself as a person who has many obstacles that limit my freedom. And sometimes there are things I wish I can change, but I cannot. But my approach to it is like, if I find a problem, a frustration, for me, if I would try to visualize it, it's like, okay, here is this obstacle, and the first conclusion is here. Like, for example, I don't have time. Conclusion, I'm not going to create because here is my excuse, I don't have time. But with any problem, like, what if you just think, okay, what if I think that way, that way, that way? Just when you're asking yourself, hey, is it the only conclusion that I can take?
It's so hard to do when you're feeling a bit sorry for yourself, when you're just like,
especially when you have like this closed mindset and like you feel depressed. When you feel depressed, there's also nice representation, like you feel like kind of in a hole, and the only way out you see there, and you feel like, hey, I'm so trapped. But once you are able to move your head higher, you see, hey, there are so many other possibilities. So my advice would be like kind of, hey, sometimes, yeah, we are trapped, but are we really trapped?
It's so hard because I think the reality is that when you're in that place, somebody saying that to you is just the most irritating thing. I don't know how you, but it is true. I do think that's 100% true. But God, when somebody tries to point that out to you and you're just feeling like your life's a trap, and somebody's like, "Is it really like that?"
So that's when the connection is so important. Instead of telling the person, "Hey, why don't you just go there?" Give that hand. I think this understanding is so important. First, if you want to help someone, first remind yourself how it was for you.
Totally, because I definitely think I've made them, and this is why I'm interested in like having conversations with people at the moment and realizing that like I've done that before and seeing myself do that, and so I totally agree with you. It is like the best thing that you can possibly do is to see how you've been exactly or even are right in that minute exactly the same as the other person, and I think it's only really from that sort of place that anybody's going to listen to each other. I have a horrible habit of sometimes trying to preach to somebody if I think something started going right in my life, and I'm like, why don't you do it? You should just see it like this.
Just give them solutions straight away. Don't even listen to them. And they'll be like, oh yeah, thank you.
And everyone will think I'm brilliant.
You are brilliant. All good. Listening. I think listening is the key thing. And not giving people, like, you can give the solutions, but first make sure that this is actually what the other person wants.
And also, I think making sure that you've actually honestly done that yourself first. I think that it can sort of come from a better place if you genuinely. I find myself over and over and over again telling people to do things that I'm completely incapable of doing myself, and then it's totally hollow and very irritating.
I think a fun example that would fit it is like, imagine that you have someone is asking, how can I become a millionaire? And you have like 9,000 sorry 100,000 99.999, and you just say, hey, just borrow 10 pounds and you will become a millionaire. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
When the other person is like, hey, I'm not there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why when I was thinking about like advice it's a funny thing, isn't it? I think I should give less advice, really. I think all you can do, and this is what I would like to do more of, is just like narrate your own experience. That's enough, I think, for people to share. Like, it's more useful, I think, than there's a lot of people out there, isn't there, giving a lot of advice to people. True. And really, like you say, listening's more useful to people, and just I think it's more useful to share the challenges with people.
So actually, you've mentioned something that I am sometimes reflecting on. Is this idea of giving advice. Like, if you think about the art world, should we give other artists advice how they are supposed to do art and be artists? On one hand, you would say no, like, for everyone it's like a unique way, a unique journey, and when you are trying to tell them what they're supposed to do, it's not their journey, they're just trying to imitate what you've done. But on the other hand, so many artists are like so lost and they have no idea what they should do next, and there is a risk that they might completely abandon their passion, and they are like in so desperate need to actually get the advice. So what do you think, like,
I think
what's your solution?
Well, I think you've answered it in the question in a way, because it really depends on like the form of the relationship that you have with that person. Like, is this somebody who wants advice from you for a start? If it's not, then don't give it. And also, so I mean, you've advised me, for example, before, but I paid money to come to to hear your expertise, because you trained in things that I haven't, you've read books that I haven't, and you know of artists that I don't, and so I want to know what those things are. So I think in that situation, there's a body of knowledge there, isn't there, that should be shared, because that's really useful to people. If then I think we know ourselves when we tip into when we get that tension inside of ourselves, like, I don't really know if I should be saying this, and it feels a bit funny, then probably just stop. I do that all the time.
Some people don't have that but like, my approach is like, whatever I'm teaching at my workshops or courses, whatever, my approach is, I'm going to expose you to those ideas. I'm going to share with you my knowledge, my solutions, but it is completely up to you if you are going to apply it. I want you to be aware. I want you to be able to make conscious decisions on what parts of those knowledge are actually something that you want to apply in your life.
So I think that like, if that's the case, then you impart that knowledge, you give that knowledge, they go off and do whatever they want with it, and then that's absolutely fine. I think, like, what would be interesting to notice is, like, are we okay with that? Because sometimes I can catch myself, say, with the kids or with my son or whatever. My son's probably a good example, like giving some advice to him, like, oh, well, you could do this, but really I want him to do this thing. And so, like, my response to what he actually goes off and does will tell me whether I'm really okay with that. Because sometimes there is a bit of a control thing there. Because if that, that's what that's all we're ever doing when we're sharing information. It's like, this is the way I've seen things. If you're interested in hearing what I've got to say, here it is. and then off you go and do whatever you'll do with that, and that's always okay, isn't it? Like there's nothing wrong with that ever, I would say.
I don't have kids yet. I plan to have. So I already reflect a lot how I'm going to raise my kids. So
it won't be like that, by the way.
It won't. But I think what I will try is like let those kids make their own decisions. I'm going to tell them, hey, those are like some of the options. I think that this option is like really cool. Okay, I already have that bell in my mind right now. But like, I'm not going to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to make their own decisions, make their own mistakes, as long as those mistakes are not going to kill them, and learn from those life lessons.
I think there's inevitably, you have to, either as a teacher or a parent or any kind of authority figure, leader in any kind of area, you cannot help but have your understanding of what is right in certain situations. You can't get away from that. You can't be any kind of, like, I think a parent's a leader, so if I use the word leader, just, in any context, like, I don't think it's possible to be completely free of all, I don't mind how any of this turns out, I'm just going to tell you all of the options. I think the reality is that it's more like, this is the way I understand the world from everything that I've learned throughout my life, and so all I can do is advise you that I think that this would be the best way to do things, because based on everything I've learned, but with the understanding that I'm not the sole authority on this, I could be totally wrong. Like, because you can't, I mean, I can't say to my son, oh, here's a load of options, don't really mind if you do this, that, or the other, when really I think that, his life chances are going to be damaged, if you do. So I will give advice, but with the understanding that he might not take my advice, and I'll just have to live with whatever he chooses to do. It changes though as well, as they're tiny kids and big kids.
Yeah. Maybe instead of thinking about it as advice, let's think about it as discussion. Like, let's think with them together and let them to come to conclusions by themselves.
I think there's a role for that, but I do, sometimes you have to tell kids what to do.
Okay, that's true. So, getting closer to the end of this episode, I want to gently ask you to give me and maybe also the listeners the advice about creative parenting. Do you consider yourself as an adult, as a parent who is actually encouraging your kids to be more creative? And how exactly can we do this?
Let it not be about me, because sometimes I think, my son is an amazing artist. His drawings are fantastic, but he doesn't draw very much, and I have to let him do what he wants to do, and not do what he doesn't want to do. And sometimes, like, as a parent, I think that where the children become extensions of us somehow, and we're trying to get them to do these things because they somehow write things from our past, or make us feel like people think we're good parents, or and I think like the best thing you can do is to, I'm in this process right now, by the way, so I don't presume to but to recognise when the pressure we're putting on our children to do things is actually more about us than it is about them, right? And I think that can happen a lot with trying to get them to play a musical instrument, or be good at sports, or whatever it might be. I've now decided that I'm just going to do my creative thing and it's like this is what it looks like for a person to express themselves creatively, and so he can see that happening, and deal, and I talk to him very openly about the challenges that I have with that, and So that for me is quite an important thing for him to sort of see happening, that I am struggling sometimes with what people think about me, well, a lot of the time, and that it's actually it's difficult for me and it's challenging, but I'm continuing to do it because it's important to me. And I think just doing that with him there is probably like enough, really. I'm not really one to tell him to do things, despite what I've just said, like in that kind of way. What I do see is that it's really hard, I think, for young adults, like that point in their life when they're beginning to really feel self-conscious and really feel that pressure of how people perceive them. And so, I don't know, just holding their hand through that and letting them know that that's everybody's experience, and just talking to them about the things we said before, about the thoughts and all of those things. I think that's a useful thing to do. It depends on the age of your child, obviously. I mean, little kids, like, they just do it anyway. You don't need to do anything.
True.
Yeah.
I think about like right now, because I see it from a perspective of a kid. So when I'm still that young, and I still remember those situations very clearly, then what I can tell to those people who are parents is that first, what I really liked about my parents raising me is that I used to kind of hate it, that my mother signed me up for so many like different classes, sculpting, dancing. Every like week there were like some running, some sport events. I was like so tired of it. Like there were so many things and I just wanted to rest. But actually now I'm so thankful because it's really it gave me this opportunity to expose myself to so many diverse things. I think when there are difficult times and you have, let's say, this little crisis or just difficult moments in your life, this is so important to have like a parent next to you and like telling you that what you're doing is like important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's valuable, and it doesn't matter if like other people think something else. And at the same time, when your kid actually like is the opposite, has big dreams, is in those moments of inspirations, this support is also so crucial over there to actually help them to reach those dreams, but not by just like keep giving them everything they need without their effort, but helping them to make sure that the effort they put is actually focused.
Yeah.
So don't do everything for them by just making them like banana kids, but help them to reach those dreams by themselves.
Yeah, it's like when we were talking about when you said about listening to people, like that, you know, if there's if somebody really thinks that what they think matters and what they say matters, and parents can obviously have a huge impact on that, just giving kids space to just like it really does. You have a unique perspective which is worthwhile listening to, and I think that's huge. And
as a parent, you can be an inspiration yourself.
Absolutely. And I think maybe when you were talking about the possibilities thing, like I try to do this with kids at school as well, like getting them to visualize, like, because some of them are just they don't have any thoughts at all about what they want to do with their life, or they're not confident enough to talk about them. So even just asking the question, like, what do you see happening in the future? And you can see some of them like, I don't know. But I think just some kids are constantly talked to about possibilities. And some kids have this all of the time where parents will constantly talk to them about, well, of course you could do that, of course you could do this.
Yeah.
And for some kids that's not happening. And so like we just need to be the person for those kids, like whether they're our own or not our own, who is getting them to even consider that they could be anything really, is really important, I think. Just, yeah.
I remember it saying from my perspective was that I had those desires, but I didn't see the steps that I can take.
Yes, yeah.
Because I had no idea how the world works. I had no idea what were the possibilities. And it made me so frustrated when my parents, so many things were so obvious for them.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is obvious, but I am not able to see the fourth step when they're talking about the 900 step.
And I think that's absolutely crucial when we think about equity and accessibility for all kinds of things, because you can have all of the aspiration in the world and all of these big dreams, and then there'll be some people, by virtue of their situation, have more access to people who can show them those steps, and then some people for whom it's like, well, here's this big dream and here's reality, and I have zero idea of how to do any of that. And I think it's a place that we like, that everyone can help with. Like, everyone can be the person who listens to somebody else and says, oh, well, how can we and that's creativity. That's kind of thinking outside the box. That's like, how do we get from, so you have this idea, like whatever it is, how do we get from here, how do we make that happen? Yeah.
Is there anything else that we didn't mention so far that you would like to share?
It's this, the smallest little action of noticing it can be really powerful, I think, if it's repeated. And I'm saying that with like, I'm sort of just in the middle of trying to do this. So I'm sort of saying that, I don't know how to put this. It's not like I do this all of the time. It's just that I know that, like just a little tiny moment in the busyness, like, can make a massive amount of difference. And then just, like, literally sit down and do it, even if it's 30 seconds. Like, whatever it is that you're doing, like, just sit down and do it. And like, and the tiniest little action, which might feel like nothing at all, accumulated over a long period of time, or years even, is incredibly powerful and productive in terms of making something else.
No matter how small, it's still like a little escape from the autopilot. So even if you do this like just once a week, or just for 30 seconds, every such escape can make a massive difference. Okay. Well, Stacey, thank you very much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And every time when I talk with you, I like how you make me think in a different way about myself, and like sometimes you say, hey, there's something like this, like myself. So yeah, thank you very much for expanding my mind.
Thank you too. That's really great.
Okay, that's the end. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did, and that it maybe blew your mind. Soon you will see some more conversations in this beautiful environment. But yeah, if you have any more feedback for me, or if you found anything like really interesting in this conversation, then please share your reflections in the comments, and please give me feedback on how I can improve this podcast also in the comments. I love to experiment, I love to try new things, so if there's anything that you like or don't like, please let me know. And again, you are very welcome to join our creative community, link in the description. And please subscribe. That's everything from me. Have a beautiful, creative, and inspiring day. See you in the next episode.